Okay, climate change. First of all, we talked in our lab about this idea of trapping infrared radiation or heat. So all of our greenhouse gases that we're talking about today trap that infrared radiation, that heat, and make our planet warmer. Again, key to remember, the naturally occurring greenhouse effect is very important for life on the planet. However, as we add more and more of these gases to the atmosphere, we're heating things up in a way that, and at a rate that hasn't been really seen before. So our major greenhouse gases, the ones you guys need to know, there's 6 of them. You need to know about water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, ozone, and CFCs. So let's talk about carbon dioxide first. Naturally, we talked about this in class with our carbon cycle diagram, but natural sources of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere include outgassing from oceans, any type of respiration by organisms. Again, carbon dioxide is given off by organisms when they break down glucose, so even plants do respire. And outgassing from oceans. So oceans will both absorb and release carbon dioxide gas in kind of an equilibrium process. Anthropogenic, remember that term. Important. Anthropogenic means human-caused. Human-caused releases of carbon dioxide, primarily burning fossil fuels and deforestation. Guys, not all fossil fuels release the same amount of CO2. One of the reasons our country is going to natural gas as an electricity source to generate electricity is because natural gas only releases about 56% of the CO2 coal does. So not all of your fossil fuels produce CO2 at the same rate. However, they all will. Okay, so currently our level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is 390 ppm, or parts per million. That's the number to remember. Our rate is increasing about 2 ppm per year, or 3.3%. It's quite a bit of rate increase per year. Our current estimates indicate about 560 ppm by 2050. 350 parts per million is considered the crucial level, and above that, we're not going to see climatic stability. Do you notice the problem? We're at 390 currently. 350 is that level for a stable climate. Not fabulous. So when we talk about working with CO2 emissions as a world, because again, the gases distribute all across the planet, there are 3 different ways to look at CO2 and who produces the most, and these 3 different ways are the reasons that we have so many problems coming to an agreement on treaties. So we could look at, first of all, pure volume. Just by tons per year, what country is producing the most? Currently, it's China. We're next, then the EU, if you consider the EU as kind of a region, Indonesia, Russia, Japan, and then if Texas was a country, we'd be right here. This is how much CO2 we're producing. We're producing more than India, the whole nation. Awesome. In any case, that's volume. In terms of how much CO2 have we pumped into the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution, so what percentage of our current levels of CO2 in the atmosphere are we responsible for? The U.S. has put about 25% of all of the CO2 into the atmosphere that's currently there since the Industrial Revolution. The EU is 22% and China is 5%. And then if you look at per capita is an important term. It means per person. Per capita carbon dioxide emissions, the U.S. per person emits 15 tons of CO2 per person, then Great Britain 9.2 tons. The world average is 4 tons per capita per person, and China's at 3.2 tons. So when you're trying to negotiate an international treaty, when you're looking at, right now China produces more than the U.S. However, if you look, historically, in terms of what is in the atmosphere right now, the U.S. is responsible for a quarter of it, or per person. Like, hey, if you look, different countries are producing more per person. It's very challenging to come to an agreement about how much each country is responsible for. That's primarily the reason the Kyoto Accord, was not adopted by all the countries, this disagreement between who's responsible for what. Okay, let's talk about methane. Methane is about 21 times as potent per molecule at trapping heat. That means that methane will trap 21 times more heat per molecule. So methane is very powerful. It's released naturally from anaerobic decay, so it's that like gross smell. Anytime things break down anaerobically without oxygen, you're releasing some methane. So wetlands, so that kind of stanky smell you get if you're in a wetland, or if you mix up the dirt at the bottom of a wetland, that's methane, as well as hydrogen sulfide, which also smells bad. But in any case, the second greatest natural source is from termite gut decomposition. What that means is that termites break down wood, and when they do that, they do it in an anaerobic environment, and that releases methane. Who knew? Termites, second most greatest cause of naturally released methane. Anthropogenic, so human caused. We've got livestock burps. We talked about this in our play. That's the #1 source of methane from humans. Landfills, so that anaerobic decay of trash. Anytime you have leaking natural gas infrastructure, so you drill, guys, natural gas is methane. So every time you turn on the stove in your house, whatever, you're burning methane. When we drill for that, a lot of times it leaks a little from the pipes and stuff. And then coal production. Our next greenhouse gas, nitrous oxide, N2O, it traps 300 times more heat than CO2 per molecule. Luckily for us, it's at pretty low concentrations in the atmosphere. Naturally, when bacteria are breaking down nitrogen compounds and at the bottom of wetlands and oceans, that is what releases our nitrous oxide. Human caused, when we over-fertilize our fields, as that nitrogen in the fertilizer decays, we release nitrous oxide. Also, combustion of fossil fuels in cars a little bit. Guys, ozone, which is an O3 molecule, and CFCs also do a really good job of trapping heat, but you don't need to know anything else besides the fact that they trap heat. Okay? We can't go back in time. We don't have a time machine. So, section 3. We can't go back in time. So how do we understand what our atmosphere was like? Well, we have to use what's called proxy indicators. We talked in class about the ice cores. Again, the air bubbles trapped in the ice cores trap a teeny tiny little bit of the atmosphere, and that is that will give us like a little teeny tiny sample of the actual atmosphere that was there at the time. We can look at fossils of plants as well as pollen to see what type of plants were growing in a certain region. We can look at tree rings. That'll indicate, again, proxy indicators of climate. So in climate, we're really looking at rainfall as a really important indicator of climate as well. So tree rings will tell us. We also can look at samples of old coral reefs, as well as these things called speleothem. Speleothem is a really fancy word for cave stalactites. They hang tight to the ceiling. And stalagmites. And researchers in Texas are doing some cool research about looking at the growth rates of these guys to determine precipitation levels. So we've got this really cool organization called the IPCC. It's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. So the cool thing about this committee, it's a committee of scientists from over 130 countries, and they analyze all of the climate data and put together a big synthesized report. This is really important. The last report that came out was in 2007, and this report in 2007 analyzed over 30,000 different research papers. These scientists from 130 countries looking at over 30,000 pieces of scientifically accurate published data is a really good synthesis of our climate information at the time, the most current research. The next IPCC report is coming out literally within the next 2 weeks, so we're going to talk about it. Watch for it. Okay, what does this report tell us? It tells us that we've seen some change, about 1.3 degree Fahrenheit change between 1906 and 2005. Our greenhouse gas emissions from 1970 to 2005 have risen over 70%. We've seen about 10 to 20 centimeters of sea level rise. We're seeing a lot of different things. Okay? Effects of climate change, section 4. Okay? So it's really important for you guys to understand that climate change is, I like calling it climate change instead of global warming, because it's not just about temperature. Remember our two things about climate, temperature and precipitation? Both of those things are really important in understanding climate change because our temperature is going up. The piece of the puzzle that people miss a lot of times is that we have this changing of our precipitation patterns. Really what happens is as things get warmer, you get more water vapor in the air. And what that does is really kind of exacerbate existing climate issues. For example, Central Texas is kind of semi-arid. We're leaning more towards the arid side now. So you see your normal trends, which is like in Central Texas, semi-arid, and the trend is intensified. Areas that get lots of precipitation are going to get more, and you won't get the nice gentle rain that infiltrates and percolates down into your aquifer. You're going to get some serious downfall. And when you have these serious downfalls, you have flash flooding. So you have like runoff and flooding instead of like nice percolation into the ground. So really when you hear climate change, think warmer temperature and think intensification of the precipitation cycle. That intensification idea and that piece is really important. Okay, we have to talk about sea level rise, effects of climate change. So sea level rise and glaciers. We're really seeing a lot of sea level rise thus far, and this is important. What we've seen for the majority of our sea level rise is due to what's called thermal expansion. Thermal expansion! What that means is that basically here are your water molecules, the water molecule. And then as you raise the temperature, think about things on a molecular level. Those water molecules move around faster, like, woo, it's a party. And as they move around more, they expand in space more. So what we've seen so far in our sea level rise is thermal expansion primarily. The water's warmer, molecules spread out, they're having a party, and our sea level has risen. However, we're at the point now really where we're starting to see quite a bit of glacier melt and ice sheet melt. If you've ever been to Glacier National Park, it's beautiful, amazing. Go soon, because all the glaciers are going to be gone by 2030. That's not very long. Also, as you have your ice sheets melt, your big ice sheets on Antarctica, the Arctic, and Greenland, as you melt the ice, remember, ice has very high albedo, lots of reflectivity. As that white ice melts, it exposes black ground, which makes things heat up even faster. And then you have kind of a positive, it's called a positive feedback loop, where one thing happens, like the ice melts, and then it gets hotter, so it melts faster and faster and faster. Okay? Forestry and agriculture. So we've got this like really great agricultural system in the United States. In the Midwest, we grow lots of stuff. Well, when we see precipitation patterns changing, we're going to see, and temperatures, we're going to see where we used to be able to grow corn in like the nice Midwest, it's going to shift north. So Canada's going to be able to grow stuff. We're going to be like, Canada, send us some corn. Because we're already kind of seeing, especially in areas that are farming in semi-arid regions, as your precipitation patterns shift, your climate or your agricultural bands shift as well. Forests, so you see increased forests fires because things are drier and more susceptible to pest damage, which is problematic as well. Our organisms get all messed up. We're going to do a whole little project on this on the next unit. So when things are dependent upon like a certain temperature to live, like plants, or like certain seasons of temperature to breed, that gets all messed up. We're going to talk about that more in climate. And then human health. You may not have thought about this, but there are some really nasty diseases like malaria and dengue fever that are spread by mosquitoes. And as things warm up, the range at which these like nasty disease-carrying mosquitoes can live spreads. So we're seeing a lot increase in the area on the planet that people can get malaria in, because these mosquitoes are spreading out both in latitude going north and in altitude going up mountain areas. So no bueno. Okay, we have some special issues in the Arctic. The average amount that our planet has warmed is 1.3 degrees Fahrenheit. However, that's an average. We've actually seen it getting a little bit warmer in the Arctic and the Antarctic. Okay. And then we've got this thing called permafrost. And permafrost is the big question mark for scientists. Permafrost is permanently frozen ground. And when that ground is frozen and then unthaws, you have this decomposition that happens. And you release, guess what you release with anaerobic decomposition? Yes, that's right, methane, CH4. And when that methane is released, remember we talked about methane, 21 times more potent a greenhouse gas. So when that methane is released, we don't know what the effect on the climate's going to be. We know it's going to be bad. We're not sure how much is going to be released from the permafrost. Scientists are a little freaked out about this because we don't know, but we just know it's going to be bad when that permafrost starts melting. So section 5, how bad could it be? It's considered unavoidable that our planet will get up to 450 ppm. There were some days last year, in last March, that hit 400 ppm average worldwide. Pretty much we're going to get 450 ppm. So what do we see? We see this intensification in the precipitation cycle. So we have more droughts, more floods, more desert regions spread. We have some conflicts over water supplies. Glaciers are melting. Sea level is rising enough to flood low-lying coastal areas like Bangladesh. Guys, Bangladesh, multi-million people. I think it's like 20 million. Don't quote me. But in any case, 20 million people, that almost the entire country is under, like, kind of under sea level. So just a little bit of sea level rise, like 20 million people need to find somewhere to live. And then high risk of extinction of polar species. That's 450. Pretty much, guys, that's going to happen. 550, or like at the rate we're going with no change or concern about our CO2 levels, my estimation is 550 is going to happen too. So we see a lot more forest fires, a lot more droughts, major heat waves. It's estimated about 1.5 billion people are going to suffer water shortages. That's problematic. Malaria and several other tropical diseases spread further. Really sharply falling crop yields. It's problematic, guys, when people don't have food and people don't have water. The Amazon rainforest ecosystem may start collapsing, which is problematic. About half of the Arctic tundra melts, and once that happens, wow, we got all that methane, no good. 20 to 30% of plant and animal species face premature extinction at 550. And honestly, guys, I think that's kind of within the realm of possibility, perhaps in our lifetime as well, probably in yours, maybe in mine if I keep eating my veggies. Anyway, 650, this is like kind of the, oh my goodness, hopefully this doesn't happen. That corresponds with 4 degrees Celsius warming. So you just have all of this stuff that's been already happening, but like a lot crazier. Like instead of just water shortages, now you have water wars, environmental refugees from places that are under the ocean now. Sea level rise is faster. Pretty much, what cities do you like on the U.S. that would flood at 650? I like Miami. Miami's gone. New York, all flooded. New Orleans, that was flooded at 550. L.A. probably. I like San Francisco. That's gone too. All of those cities flooded at 650. So that's problematic. And then at least half of plant and animal species face premature extinction at 650. Guys, remember, half plant animal species extinct, that's mass extinction event. So now that we're all cheerful, let's talk about what we can do. There's 2 types of approaches to climate change. The first is mitigation. How can we stop producing these CO2, these climate change gases? And the second is adaptation. So adaptation is like, hey, we know there's going to be sea level rise. Maybe we could move people in. Maybe we could build some seawalls. Maybe we can change some of our policies. So adaptation is like, we know it's going to happen. How can we prepare? All right, so we can reduce fossil fuels by changing our electrical system. So instead of burning coal, natural gas releases less CO2, even better renewables. Okay, transportation, second largest category of greenhouse gas emission in the U.S. So how can we change that? We can drive hybrids, we can carpool, we can bus, all those type of things. Deforestation, also a huge source of greenhouse gases. So if we just stop chopping and burning our trees, that would be helpful. All right, Kyoto Protocol was an attempt. So we're at, we're still on what to do. Sorry. So Kyoto Protocol attempted to limit, but that idea, the U.S. never signed that treaty, and it's kind of been officially dead. We need you guys to be like, go to college and be smart and be diplomats and work on this problem, because Kyoto expired basically, and we haven't come up with anything else because we haven't been able to come to the table together on this idea of who's put the most in the atmosphere historically, right? The U.S. 25%, and who's emitting the most right now, which is by tonnage, China. So this conflict really between the U.S. and China, we're having a hard time coming to grips with who's really responsible and who has to cut the most. That's kind of the downside. Like, as a nation, not doing much. The upside is that local municipalities and local governments have said, you know what, this is silly. We need to do something about this. So state and local governments have really taken the lead. U.S. mayors signed a climate protection agreement. So the mayors of pretty much most of the major cities in the United States, New York, L.A., Austin, have signed the Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement, which is an act that the mayors signed that their cities are going to work on reducing CO2 emissions. So yay, mayors. Like, no action with the feds. They'll do that. California is undergoing an interesting experiment right now. They passed the Global Warming Solution Act, which aims to cut the state's greenhouse gas emissions by 25% in the next 7 years. So California's a big experiment right now. California's like, let's do this. Let's do what we can. So it's an interesting local experiment on a state basis. Okay, how do we control our emissions? So there's 2 kind of schemes. There's carbon offset, which we talked about in lab, right? You emit carbon dioxide, but you pay someone to preserve a forest that, in theory, sucks out the carbon. Carbon offsets are really hot right now with multiple different companies and municipalities. And then cap and trade. Cap and trade is more of a kind of government, like, top-down solution. They'll say, we can produce, this region of the country, like Texas, can produce this much CO2. And then Texas will divide up that amount to different companies and sell those permits. And those permits, if the companies don't use them, they pollute less, they can sell those permits on the open market. So there's an economic incentive for a company to produce less CO2. It's a very market-based solution. Cap and trade has been used really successfully to regulate a different type of gas, sulfur dioxide. And that was a law to regulate that. In the United States, sulfur dioxide causes acid rain, which we'll talk about later. But there's a successful cap and trade between utilities in the U.S. Can cap and trade work? Absolutely, if there's an economic incentive attached to it. So, for example, we've reduced our sulfur dioxide emissions in this country by almost 65% because of the effectiveness of the cap and trade system for that gas. between between utility companies, so primarily electrical utilities. Okay, so that is the notes. Thank you.